The human wax dummy. The body nobody recognized. Sit down. Because this one doesn't require a haunted house or a remote forest or a signal that nobody answered. It requires a prop house in Long Beach, California, a carnival funhouse, a television production, and a human arm. That's all. A human arm, and the specific quality of inattention that allows a dead man to be mistaken for a mannequin for long enough that the precise number of years becomes difficult to establish with certainty. The prop industry runs on the willingness to look at things without really seeing them. This is a story about what that willingness costs. Part 1. The Funhouse. The Pike was an amusement park and entertainment district that occupied the waterfront of Long Beach, California for most of the 20th century, a sprawling, slightly seedy collection of rides, concessions, sideshows, and carnival attractions that catered to the working-class communities of the Los Angeles harbor area and the sailors who passed through the port of Long Beach. It was the kind of place that existed in the specific American tradition of the waterfront amusement zone. Loud, colorful, slightly dangerous in the casual way that mid-century American entertainment accepted as normal, and possessed of the particular atmosphere that attaches to places where large numbers of people go to feel something they don't feel in their ordinary lives. Among the Pike's attractions, in the decades after the Second World War, was a funhouse, a walk-through attraction of the variety common to the era, featuring the standard props of carnival horror, distorting mirrors, mechanical monsters, pneumatic floor jets, and wax figures. Wax figures were a standard element of carnival attractions in this period. They were cheap to produce, required no maintenance, and could be posed in whatever configuration the carnival's aesthetic sense demanded. They aged ungracefully but serviceably, yellowing, cracking, their features becoming less distinct over time in ways that were, in the context of a horror funhouse, more asset than liability. Among the wax figures in the Pike's funhouse was one that had been hanging from a rope for a very long time. It hung from the ceiling of one of the funhouse's chambers, posed as a hanged man, the conventional carnival shorthand for death and dread, a silhouette that visitors walked past without stopping, registering it as part of the attraction's general atmosphere and moving on. It was unremarkable. It was a prop. It was, as far as anyone connected to the attraction could say with certainty, made of wax. It was not made of wax. Part 2. The Discovery. In December 1976, a television production crew from the American Broadcasting Company arrived at the Pike to film an episode of The $6 Million Man, a popular action-adventure series whose production requirements occasionally brought its crew to the various locations available in the greater Los Angeles area, including its waterfront attractions. The episode required the use of the funhouse as a location. The production crew began the process of preparing the space for filming, moving equipment, adjusting lighting, repositioning props to accommodate camera angles and shot requirements. In the course of this work, a crew member moved the hanging figure, reached for it, shifted it, and encountered in the process something that a wax mannequin does not do. The arm came off. Inside the arm, visible at the point of separation, bone. Human bone, wrapped in the remains of human tissue that had dried and partially mummified over the years of the figure's hanging, its exterior so thoroughly coated in a layer of wax or paint that its true composition had been invisible to casual observation. The production was halted. The Long Beach Police Department was called. Forensic investigators arrived and began the process of examining what had been, until that morning, an unremarkable prop in a carnival funhouse. What they found was a human body, male, adult, mummified by the specific combination of time and the dry California air and the coating of materials applied to its exterior, dressed in clothing of a style consistent with the early 20th century. The body had been displayed in various locations and contexts for an estimated 20 to 30 years at minimum, though the precise duration was, and remains, uncertain, because the body's history before its arrival at the Pike was not clearly documented. The arm that broke off changed everything. Nothing else had ever suggested this was anything other than a prop. Part 3. The Identity. The identification process that followed the discovery produced, eventually, a name: Elmer McCurdy. McCurdy was born in 1880 and died on October 7, 1911, in Oklahoma, killed by law enforcement officers after a failed train robbery in which he and his accomplices had held up the wrong train, obtaining a small amount of whiskey and approximately $46 in cash. He was 31 years old. He died in a gunfight with a posse from which he had no realistic prospect of escape and which he apparently chose not to avoid. He was brought to a funeral home in Pawhuska, Oklahoma, where the undertaker, a man named Joseph Johnson, who had a practical familiarity with the preservation techniques available in the era, embalmed him with an arsenic-based compound that was effective beyond the normal requirements of preservation. The body, in the absence of anyone coming forward to claim it, was displayed at the funeral home as an attraction. This was not unusual for the period. Unclaimed bodies of notorious individuals were occasionally displayed publicly in the early 20th century, particularly in the American West, where the line between justice and spectacle was drawn with less precision than later eras would find comfortable. McCurdy was described on a placard at the funeral home as the bandit who wouldn't give up. Visitors paid a nickel, which was deposited in McCurdy's mouth to view him. In 1916, two men arrived at the funeral home claiming to be McCurdy's brothers. They were not his brothers. They were carnival promoters who had identified an opportunity and taken it with the confidence of people who understood that the documentary requirements of 1916 Oklahoma were not onerous. They took McCurdy's body and put it to work. For the next 60 years, Elmer McCurdy traveled. Part 4. The Travels. The itinerary of Elmer McCurdy's post-mortem career is one of the strangest documents in American entertainment history. A man who became, in death, more widely traveled and more commercially productive than he had ever been in life. He was displayed in carnivals and sideshows across the American West and Midwest throughout the late 1910s and 1920s. Billed variously as the outlaw who would never be caught again and other formulations that the carnival promotional tradition favored. He was sold and resold between carnival operators with the casual commerce applied to other inventory. He was displayed alongside bearded ladies and anatomical curiosities and the other attractions of the American carnival circuit. At some point in his travels, he passed through the ownership of a wax museum. This transition is documented but not precisely dated, and was incorporated into a display in a way that required his exterior to be coated with wax or a wax-like substance to make him consistent with the other exhibits. This coating survived all subsequent handling and contributed materially to his invisibility as a human body for the decades that followed. He was, at various points, displayed in a haunted house in Los Angeles, in a museum in Vancouver, and in at least one other location that the documentary record does not clearly establish. The records of his ownership and display across the middle decades of the 20th century are incomplete. partly because the carnival and sideshow industry of the era did not maintain comprehensive documentation, and partly because nobody involved in his display knew or cared that they were dealing with human remains rather than a prop. He arrived at the Pike in Long Beach at some point in the 1960s. He hung there until December 1976. The television production crew came to film a science fiction adventure series about a man with bionic limbs. They found a dead Oklahoma train robber from 1911. Part 5: The Return. After his identification, Elmer McCurdy was accorded something he had not had since October 7, 1911, a burial. On April 22, 1977, he was interred at the Boot Hill section of the Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, Oklahoma, near other outlaws and lawmen of the territorial period. 2 feet of concrete were poured over his casket to prevent any future disinterment, a precaution that reflects, perhaps, a certain institutional awareness of what had happened the last time McCurdy was left unguarded. The state of Oklahoma's medical examiner who handled the identification, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, described the case in his memoir. He noted that McCurdy's arsenic-based embalming had been extraordinarily effective, more effective, he suggested, than any modern preparation he had encountered. McCurdy had been dead for 66 years when he was identified. He had been displayed for most of those years. He had been in circulation in the American entertainment industry for 6 decades without anyone understanding what they were handling. The questions that the case raises are not about the supernatural. They are, in some ways, more unsettling than that. They are about the quality of human attention, about how thoroughly the context in which we encounter something determines what we see when we look at it. Every person who walked past Elmer McCurdy in 60 years of carnival display saw a prop. They saw a wax dummy. They saw what the context told them they were looking at. The context was a funhouse, and the funhouse contained props, and the figure hanging from the rope was therefore a prop, and no one looked closely enough to discover that the prop had bones and that the bones had a name. The specific question this raises, about what else we are not seeing, about what else is in plain sight in a context that has told us to look without seeing, is one that the Long Beach funhouse does not answer by itself. But it suggests the question, and the suggestion, once made, is not easily put aside. The next time you are in a place full of things designed to look like other things, a theater, a museum, a carnival, a prop house, any of the many spaces that the entertainment industry fills with objects whose purpose is to be looked at rather than examined, it may be worth asking how you would know, how any of us would know what we are actually looking at. And there we'll leave him, finally at rest beneath 2 feet of concrete. Until next time, sleep well, my friend.